Hi everyone, welcome to Mangata Monday. Today we have a very special guest from the common good Statemine Parachain, and this is Joe Petrowski. Hi Joe.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So this will be a recorded session, so we are also sharing our screen in Discord, and this video will go live later on YouTube. If anyone of you wants to ask a question, please ask it in the Mangata Monday channel. Yes, so maybe leading over, we also have, of course, with us Gleb, co-founder and CTO of Mangata. And maybe to lead in the last week, we had as a special guest for our Mangata Monday community call, Megan Sky from the Vinia network. And so the Vinia network is building a bridge and channel ecosystem where they want to connect different ecosystems and also channel different parachains to each other. And so this is part of our effort to understand everything a little bit better in where we are in the overall ecosystem and connecting everything. And this is why we also thought about you, Joe, and the Statemine Parachain, because recently you have opened up channels to, I think, Moonriver, Karura, and Bifrost. Is it correct?
Yeah, just those three so far.
Yes, so maybe I would be interested to just hear a little bit, when did the Statemine project and Statemint project launch? When did it start? And what was the progress so far? And where are you?
Yeah, so we launched Statemine, I think it was back in like May or June on Kusama. And then we launched Statemint at the beginning of December on Polkadot. So yeah, about like maybe 5 or 6 months apart for those milestones. And we actually have like quite a lot coming up. Like most of the review from the audits has been complete, and all the like changes and stuff are coming out in the next release. And so on the Kusama side, we've done a lot. We had like we started with XCM version 0, and then went to version 1, version 2, and so like teleporting and HRMP channels and all of that we've tried out on Kusama. On Polkadot, we're still keeping it closed, just to do some final checks. It does actually, these messages convey a lot of value, and so it's something we want to roll out really conservatively and slowly on Polkadot. But we're making progress towards getting kind of like the next generation of the cross consensus message format out on Kusama and Polkadot. So have made quite a bit of progress lately.
And so maybe to recap for our audience, XCM is the format that allows us to transfer tokens and messages between different parachains and also between other protocols, right? So maybe could you summarize for us, what is the vision of the Statemine chain? Is it about tokens, or is it different from that?
Yeah, so it's mainly focused on tokens, and it supports both fungible and non-fungible tokens. And I think we're going to keep like the core functionality around that. So kind of in our, say, 6 month roadmap, we really just want to make the cross-chain interactions a bit more mature and stable. So we did have these first channels open with other parachains. And we've already found like a couple issues that come up. So I think Moonriver brought up an issue about the token that actually pays for fees in a cross-chain message, and kind of needing to bundle some stuff together there. We've also seen some issues with sending. It works to send tokens out of Statemine, but not to send them back. So made some changes to XCM to make that work. But Statemint and Statemine will stay very like asset focused, so fungible and non-fungible assets. And like it kind of is meant to be a home base for the Polkadot and Kusama ecosystems for managed assets. So you can kind of think of like, there's a lot of stuff that's really basic that you might not even really think of when thinking of like an ERC20 asset or something, that become really complicated in a multi-chain environment. And so one of those things you might want to know, like, well, what's the total issuance of my token in the network, right? Um, if you think about like, well, I've deployed this token on 20 or 100 different parachains, that might be really difficult. But if you deploy your token on Statement, you can still transfer that token via cross-chain messages to other parachains, but Statemint will track how much of that token has actually been sent outside of Statemint to other parachains. So you can answer questions like, well, how much of my token exists in the entire Polkadot network across all parachains, right? And it also gives you like a management portal. So for like more write operations, like if you want to issue or burn new instances of your token, you can do that all from Statemint and then send that to other parachains in the network. So it's kind of like one place where you can manage your assets, but also get information about it that kind of describes how that asset is being used and distributed across the entire network of all parachains.
Interesting. So it's like a basic registry of tokens and everyone can use it if they want, and it's permissionless.
Yeah, exactly. So it is a registry, but the cool thing is like it's specialized in doing that, right? So all of the transactions or like all the function calls on API is directly in the chain. It's not built on a smart contract. It's not a smart contract interface. So if you compare it to something like ERC20 on Ethereum, that's giving you an interface, but you have multiple different implementations of that interface. And so you can get like varying, wildly different gas costs for the same operation on different ERC20 tokens on Ethereum. But everything on Statemint is like, it's a common implementation. So there's no gas metering, or it's not like one token is going to be more expensive to transfer than another token or something like that.
Oh, I see. And with ERC20 tokens, it's not only about gas, right? The core functions may be different. So basically, the transfer function on one ERC20 token may do something entirely different from other ERC20 token. But also having the implementation set in stone, also limiting the token owners in their functionality, aren't it? So what if someone wants to bind more to their tokens?
Yeah, so that's something we're working on with kind of like the next version or next iteration of cross-consensus messaging is a format to express more complex interchain relationships. So if you think about like some very basic roles in the management of a token, we break it down into 4 different roles, but just take one of them and call it like the token issuer, right? So you want to take one account and say, this is the one account that has the authority to issue new instances of this token. And if you're just working like in the context of Statemint only and there's no other parachains at all, then you're kind of limited to making that an account. And you can do some pretty fancy stuff with like multi-sigs and proxies, but ultimately you're coming down to like individuals who are holding keys and making some coordinated effort to submit a transaction that would mint some new tokens of your asset. But what if you wanted to have like a smart contract that actually manages the issuance of your token so that it could be checking for some other events and it would only issue new tokens if some of those happened, and it would be like completely permissionless and all happening on chain via the smart contract. So that's not really possible like in Statemint in isolation, but it will be possible in the next 6 months on Polkadot and Kusama via these cross-chain messages. So if there's like a smart contract parachain, which I guess there already are parachains on both Polkadot and Kusama that support smart contracts, we have this like multi-location thing where you can kind of describe like a path to another parachain or like an account on another parachain, right? So you could say that like actually instead of my issuer being an account on Statemint, I want the issuer to be the smart contract on another parachain. And then it would just be waiting for a cross-chain message from that particular account on that particular parachain with instructions to update the token issuance. And then using that, then you'd actually be able to like extend any kind of functionality you wanted, whether it was a smart contract parachain and you wanted to be a smart contract, or you're talking to another chain that is, it's not a smart contract chain, it's a specialized chain, but it wants to have some asset on Statemint that it controls. You'll be able to do that and put any kind of like advanced functionality or logic that you want on other blockchains and just designate them as the privileged roles within Statemint.
Does it also mean what Statemint can be a source of truth about token distribution across parachains for tokens which are not originated from Statemint? For example, native tokens of other parachains. If we want to use Statemint as a registry which shows which chains do have those tokens in which amount. So can Statemint do it also for tokens which originates from outside of that parachain?
That's not something we've really like designed around now. I guess it could be possible, but it's probably best for for a parachain that has its own native token to kind of keep track of that particular token's issuance on its own. Obviously, one parachain's token distribution is like it's a very high interest to that parachain, like where its tokens are, and so it might not want to outsource that. And it needs to kind of be recorded somewhere. But definitely for like other tokens, like we know that on some parachains, people are going to create other tokens within that parachain. So I know like on Moonriver, a ton of different tokens that have been created on Moonriver. And maybe like they want to actually do that on Statemint. So you could have a parachain that says like, we're going to keep track of our own native balance. But any tokens that get created within our parachain, the user interface could be entirely through that parachain, but it could just execute any user desires by sending a cross-chain message over to Statemint to do all the asset tracking and management.
Yeah, I see. So that makes sense, and obviously the native token is of interest of every parachain, but also tight cross-chain integration can be also of interest of parachains, because what we are building here is not separate chains communicating with each other. We are building an ecosystem, and tight integration sometimes can be even more interesting for a parachain than having control on some part of their own logic, because as more parachains became interconnected, the better the user experience can be for entire Polkadot ecosystem.
Yeah, not just user experience, but I like what you said about it's not just like a bunch of networks sending each other messages, because they come with very heavy trust assumptions. And, we can have people outside of blockchain send each other messages, and you still have to kind of decide like how much you trust that message. Whereas kind of like within the ecosystem of Polkadot or Kusama, you have this like common security interface that everybody's using, so you can kind of build more robust ecosystems. You have a stronger foundation to actually build these applications on top.
It relates to the discussion that was recently being had around Vitalik Buterin's blog post, where he was saying that there is no cross-chain future, only a multi-chain future. And what he meant by that was that he said there are trust boundaries and there shouldn't be happening too much between the trust boundaries. And I think there was a very strong response from the Polkadot and Kusama community in showing why they think differently. Do you have a take on that?
Actually, I would say that Polkadot is quite aligned with what Vitalik said about the trust boundaries, like because you have the messaging between parachains is not across trust boundaries; it's all within one trust boundary. And so it's actually like that's what you kind of get from the relay chain is you have this guarantee that you're on the same canonical chain as the other parachains that you're interacting with, and so you don't really need to trust in their finality because you're all sharing it from the relay chain. And so you can kind of consider Polkadot and all of the parachains, even though they're very different and specialized, they're still a single consensus system. And so I'd actually say that's like basically within what Vitalik was saying was like all these parachains are a single consensus system. And you'd kind of imagine a few of them existing, a few consensus systems, but each consensus system might actually involve a lot of different blockchains, at least in the case of Polkadot being one consensus system with lots of different blockchains.
So, maybe then from our perspective, because we want to be a DEX that offers tokens from different ecosystems. So actually, we want to be a cross-chain DEX. So I guess the complicating part for us is that we have to trust on different, we have to rely on different trust assumptions or different trust boundaries, and we have to cross them in. So what do you think is necessary to make it enough secure or to add enough security from that perspective?
I guess, are you talking about just tokens from other parachains or from entirely other ecosystems.
Let's say from all over the world. So ETH, maybe from the Cosmos ecosystem, from the Polkadot and Kusama ecosystems.
Yeah, so you basically need some trust assumption for each security umbrella. So for everything that falls under Polkadot, if you're a parachain, then you have the same guarantees. So you could basically have zero latency activity for those tokens within your network. Now, for other things, like if you have something coming from like Bitcoin or Ethereum, then you need some kind of judgment on whether the state change is final or not. And so that comes down to the bridge logic. And, like my kind of thesis is will probably come down to, say, a handful of different networks or consensus systems. So just kind of like we have operating systems, right? Like there's a period where there were tons of different operating systems out there. And then it comes down to like Windows, Mac, Ubuntu, Red Hat, Fedora, like a couple, and you say like Arch, like kind of 3 broad Linux classes plus Mac and Windows, right? It's like broadly speaking 5 primary operating systems out there that most people are using. And I'm guessing we see something kind of similar to that. So we could have like Polkadot ecosystem, the Kusama ecosystem, Ethereum 2 with a bunch of different shards, Bitcoin, and maybe a couple other chains, right? But I think people, even if you're talking like hundreds of different blockchains, or even thousands or tens of thousands of different blockchains, I still believe like long term, like 10 or 20 years, it's going to converge into, say 5 to 10 different security umbrellas. And then you basically need some kind of judgment on any chain that's from outside of your security umbrella, what kind of confidence you have in the finality of that chain, right? And then you can use the tokens there. But this is kind of like what Vitalik was saying, was that like for bridges, as the value on them goes up, the incentive to attack them also goes up, right? Mm-hmm. So definitely like a secure bridging thing, a secure bridging solution is important to the ecosystem, but bridges also rely on the security of the chains that they're bridging. And so that's why I think we end up with, a chain is really only worth interacting. It has a very high security that's relatively close to.
That's a really interesting vision about several different multi-chain security umbrellas in the future instead of thousands of blockchains we have right now. What do you think will be a differentiator? What will be the defining thing which basically tell us which ecosystem will survive and which one will not? What will be the differentiator between successors and extinct ones?
Yeah, I mean, I think like we've seen in a lot of technology, it's not always the best technology that wins. There's a lot of factors, and a lot of it is luck and timing, right? Like there's some stuff that was way ahead of its time and it didn't really work out. So I mean, I hope we're at a good time here. But I would say as far as like the factors that are a bit more in your control, I think just like abstraction and composability are the big parts. Like you need to be able to express any kind of logic. You need to be able to have like your specialized isolated blockchain that will serve your purpose, and you need composability so that you can really there's like other blockchain frameworks that kind of they're very modular. They stuff into different modules, and that's kind of decent programming practice. But composability is really important, and the way like the key difference that I see in composability and modularity is modularity kind of lets you just take in like it says like I want to use governance, I want to use, and you pull in some kind of like predefined interface or logic, whereas composability is really letting you define the relationships between those different modules, right? So if you want to say like, yeah, I want to use staking, but I want to like when somebody gets slashed, like I want this to go to this other module and link these things together so that you can really define relationships between different pieces of logic and not just say that you want.
I see. And speaking about exactly modularity and composability, have you thought about taking the step forward and being, well, the only source of tokens for the Polkadot ecosystem? So basically being a token module, everyone will just plug and play into their systems. Does it even make sense to speak about something like this?
It's another one where I think there's maybe a couple that emerge. So, Polkadot uses accounts and balances as a model. We can kind of imagine like maybe a chain that wants to specialize just in payments and it wants to use a UTXO model and it doesn't have any functionality except payments, right? And then I know there's like this multi-currency model where some chains want to have multiple currencies or maybe do something a little bit different than the balances palette that Parity provides. So I'm guessing there's not a one size fits all solution, but again, like, I worked in like integration stuff quite a lot. And when it comes to like tooling, like transaction construction libraries, integrating with wallets like Ledger and stuff, like it really does help to have a common interface so that when you make changes to it, everybody can update and you don't want 10,000 parachains who all have a different view of what balances means. So I'm guessing it's not one size fits all, but it's another thing that I think converges down to 3 to 5 different like token models, and everything can kind of pick one of those, and you know other chains should have the interfaces to deal with the other models that it's not using natively.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, technically speaking, we have the palettes, so like you mentioned, those balances, multi-currency, etc. We even have one our own because there were a couple of functions. Multi-currency of itself does not provide us with because we need to modify the staking mechanism for Mangata. But the thing is, what if those palettes, instead of really holding the value, were like just Statemint balance or Statemint multi-currency with all the value held in your parachain, and on the client side there will be only logic of working with those tokens.
Yeah, that would be awesome. That's I don't think something that's in the very short term, but that's kind of along the lines of what I imagined a lot of applications, kind of like yours actually, being able to do in like a 3 to 5 year timeline. So, if you kind of think about like a DEX, there's kind of two ways to go about it in a multi-chain environment, just very broadly speaking. Like one is you take these tokens from Statemint or Statemine and you transfer them to the chain where the DEX is, right? And then you just kind of like use them there. The other model would be to have an application where the tokens just stay on Statemint or Statemine, and the DEX, it has all its logic and users can use it, but there's no actual tokens on the DEX chain. But when somebody like makes a command or submits a transaction, it would actually just come up with a batch of instructions and say, this user wanted to do this thing, and we ran this logic, and here send a message to Statemint that says, here's 10 balance transfers, make all these balance, and then have that actually have all the transfers take place on Statemint, right? Um, and so that's like kind of like an async application model where the tokens don't really need to leave Statemint, and you kind of let Statemint handle the logic of like transfers and updating balances and accounts and stuff. I hadn't actually thought of it all the way towards using every chain's native token as some like instance on Statemint. So I think you've gone like one step further than me. But I think that's a cool idea. Like I'd be interested in seeing somebody try to do that, and if that's something we can accommodate in the Statemint roadmap and functionality, then it'd be cool to give it a try.
Yeah, thanks.
I would
Let's try to make it happen.
I would like to lead over what recently happened with the RMRK token, but there's one question from Pitekos that might match here at the point in the discussion. So they're asking, are there any other projects having a multi-currency model on Polkadot Kusama?
I think I think Composable just announced that they're doing some multi-currency token model. And there might be a couple others out there, but I'm not really up to date on everybody's token model. It's a lot to follow.
I think they announced 2 products that they will be launching on Picasso, and they have their own dedicated token. So one for the DEX and one for different service or product. Okay, maybe leading over to RMRK, because this falls a little bit into what you have been talking about XCM, and it sounds like you're really involved in everything that has to do with XCM. It seems like you're close to that, I guess, of course. So what we have witnessed, and if I'm missing anything, please add it. I think the first transfers in the XCM sense were the Karura Kusama channels that opened, and then they transferred tokens. And then a little bit later also Bifrost joined the game, so to say. And I think, so from my understanding, it is like all of the different features that are described in the XCM specification are tested out by Karura and then Bifrost, and now also Statemine and Moonriver are joining the game. And it seems to me as, for example, reserve-backed transfers might now be tested also. So can you tell us a little bit from the inside perspective on, for example, now RMRK transfers are enabled, and everyone is very hyped about RMRK transfers. And if you would have written a script on how you would roll it out, it would have played out perfectly like that. But we know that these are different teams that are working on different products, and it just fell in place very good. But so how do you look at the current progress? What is up next in the coming time, and so on? So how did that play out recently?
Yeah, I mean, it's never as smooth as it might look. So obviously, like, yeah, a lot has gone into this, and like you even see, you know, we're on XCM V2, and there was a V0 and V1 before. So there's already been a lot of iteration happening on the original version of XCM in order to get to where we are now. And we're still like, there's still a long way to go. So when we opened these channels, first we did a little bit of testing on West End, and we let these teams come on and put their parachains on West End and opened some channels there and did some testing. We actually discovered some problems where it's quite easy to send tokens out of statements, but not so easy to get them back. So there's like an update to how assets get referenced in the cross-chain messages that's going into the next release, which should be out pretty soon. And yeah, so like a lot of these teams are kind of, you know, blazing the trail, if you will, on XCM stuff. And we even kind of told them like, hey, we're a small team working on Statemint, and we're working on some other stuff. So like we don't have a ton of resources to put into like debugging XCM. And even if we did, there's a lot of tooling out there that doesn't exist that really needs to. And I know at Parity, some people are working on it, but also love to see projects in the ecosystem like block explorers and other kind of like RPC interfaces and indexers working on this as well. But basically being able to like track XCM messages, right? Because if you look at like a normal block explorer, it kind of tells you, hey, here's this transaction, here's a bunch of state changes that happened, here's a list of events that happened in this block. But with XCM, you can do a transaction that can trigger a bunch of state changes, another chain, and that gets executed 1 or 2 blocks later and causes a bunch of state changes on that. And it's kind of hard to link them together, right? Like you need to have an indexer tracking all the messages sent from and all the messages that were received on other, and actually link like, okay, well, we processed this message, this incoming message, where did it originate from? Like which chain actually sent this? And so it's kind of easy to make mistakes in XCM. So it's easy to send a token to another chain and see that your balance didn't increase. You want to say, well, you know, how come? What happened? Why didn't this token transfer arrive? And you go looking through like, well, here's a list this chain has received, and it's kind of hard, you know, to give you like a bunch of hashes, like, you know, has this message ID 0x blah blah blah. It doesn't really tell you like where that message came from or what instructions were on that message. It just says there was an error, and you might even like not even be able to find the message that's related to your token transfer, right? It's really difficult to even debug this stuff right now. So that's a huge opportunity for people to work on. If anybody's looking for ideas for projects to do, it's something Parady's working on, like I said. But yeah, there's a lot of tooling. So basically, like, we kind of said to a lot of the teams who are opening channels, like, we're small, we don't have a ton of resources to be working on XCM all the time, and it's really hard to debug problems, and so kind of like kudos to Moonriver and Karura and Bifrost for kind of being willing to demo this and try it out. So I'm actually really impressed. Like, there's definitely been some problems. There's a few issues, and that's okay. Like, we expected that. It's really early, and I think like there will be more. Like, we're still discovering stuff. That's the point of Kusama chaos. But all of these issues that people are finding, they're feeding into the development of tooling so that we can make debugging easier. They're feeding into the next version of XCM, XCM v3, and a lot of this is going to get a lot better. So it's been really exciting, and really happy with the issues that we found, and that there's going to be. I'm really optimistic that we'll see a lot of improvements coming into XCM over the next months because of it.
You're really working on the bleeding edge there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
right on the edge.
Yeah, it's really exciting because recently we've been talking a lot about this also on Twitter. That the thing that is missing for Polkadot and Kusama is open bridges and of course open channels. And initially when I was diving into this, I was wondering why are there not more open channels? But if you just look around a little bit, you see that it's like really early, and there are a few blog posts of Gavin Wood explaining it, and there are a few channels where people can discuss it, but that's mostly it. And if you want to go deeper, you have to dig and learn a lot and just work with it.
Yeah, it's still very new, but it's making progress and more people are learning about it. That's another thing, like, if besides tooling, like if you're looking for a job in this ecosystem, be an XCM expert. There's probably about 7 of them in the world. But that's something, like, if you can learn about XCM and just really be an expert in that, I'm sure there will be Parachain companies lining up to hire you. So that's it's really cutting edge and a lot of opportunity there.
What's in the roadmap? What is coming up?
Yeah, so in the short term, it's actually kind of boring. It's kind of like all the stuff about getting a product released. So, like, we've had Statemine out for a while. Statemint was just like a month ago, and I see the question in the chat: when will Statement Chain be permissionless? So I'll kind of tie the answer to that question into this. So there's a couple of things remaining. Like, one is like just finishing up the audits. So we had all the code for Statement audited, and I've addressed most of the audit report. So working on getting all of that audit stuff deployed. Also, we just updated on Statemine. We added community collators. So when we launched this, it was just 4 collators that were run by Parity. But now we've opened this up so that 4 other people can run collators on the network, and we plan to keep expanding that more and more. Hopefully move that onto Statemint as well, as long as go well on Kusama, which so far they seem to be. So get some community collators running on Statemint. Let's say more HRMP channels and just addressing feedback. So taking all the issues that come up with the HRMP channels that exist now, and all the reports of kind of like errors that are happening, and just putting that into like a better version across messaging, and getting that out. And then kind of like internally, just we're planning to build more parachains. And so there's a lot of stuff that we've kind of discovered just kind of on the fly, like, well, what's the best testing process for this? Like, how do we test a release before we put it out? What's the best release process? And really trying to just like smooth that out. And we've seen like a couple times where things went wrong. I think there was a time back in like October, maybe early November, where I think Statemine was still on XCM version 0, and the Kusama relay chain updated to version 2 of XCM, and it wasn't backwards compatible, and some people were having their teleport lost. And so, and it basically happened because like Statemine release cycle just got behind the relay chain release cycle. So really trying to like get a smoother release process so that when there's a Polkadot relay chain update, we have a Statemine update right on the back of it, like coming up really quickly. First of all, to keep everything up to date with XCM, but also just to kind of hopefully set a good example for how people can use Substrate and everything. So that's kind of like the short-term roadmap. It's not super flashy or exciting, but it's like the tools that actually apply to a lot of parachains. Every parachain can use better testing and release processes. Every parachain can use a better version of cross-consensus messaging. Everybody will benefit from seeing how a collator set can be pushed and how you can add more community collators. So yeah, it's not super flashy or exciting, but I hope it'll be really valuable in the long run and lay a really foundation for Statemint. And so to kind of get back to like this permissionless thing on Statemint, there's still a couple audit issues that we're working to finish up. And some of them are not really Statemint related, but more just like parachains related, and finishing up like all the parachains on the relay of how those get validated. And then I think it'll be in the not too distant future that all the boxes are checked and we can make Statemint permissionless, and then we'll have a really solid foundation for kind of adding these new features like we talked about, like being able to set the issuer of an asset as like a smart contract on some other parachain. That's something we're kind of looking to do a little bit later here. But for the next 3 or 4 months, I think just laying this really solid foundation that we can use for a lot of different parachains.
Yeah, you're doing the important work now, or the hard work that's necessary to make it possible for everyone.
Yeah,
A
hope
lot
so.
of points.
Hope it goes a lot beyond just Statemint, and that a lot of people can benefit from it.
Definitely, lots of points sounds really familiar to us because that's exactly what we have to do to establish the testing framework, release framework, connect outside collators to the network. Basically, those are things every parachain should do, and yeah, someone need to lay a path forward. So regarding the road plan and regarding new and exciting stuff, I have a lot of questions, but one is currently seems really important to me. Imagine a Mangata getting the slot we are aiming for and we are launching on Kusama, and obviously the very first thing we want to do as a live parachain is to open a channel to Statemint. How to do it? What should we do? And what should we take care of for it to go smooth?
Yeah, so so HRMP channels are basically one way. It takes 2 transactions. One is to request an open channel chain, and then the other parachain has to accept the channel. And then if you want the channel to be bidirectional, the other parachain has to request the channel with you, and you have to accept it. So there is this nifty origin in Polkadot ensure parachain. So maybe you're familiar with like ensure root or ensure signed. There's another one out there called ensure parachain that checks to make sure a message or a transaction is coming from a parachain. So you'd actually have the governance of Mangata submit a call or a message to the relay chain that says, I want to open an HRMP Statemine. And the fun part with Statemine is that it doesn't have governance. So the question is kind of like, well, how does it send a message back that it wants to accept the channel and also open one with you? So what we actually do is we construct the call on Kusama that says, Statemine wants to accept this request with Mangata, and also request to open a channel going the other direction. And then we have to send that message from Statemine to Kusama. So then we put together an XCM message on Statemine that says, "Hey, send this message to Kusama." But that message has to be sent from the governance of the chain, and the governance is Kusama itself. So then we go back to Kusama and we say, let's send a message to Statemine telling it to send a message back to us as the parachain that it wants to open these channels. And so that's what the actual referendum is. And so you need a community referendum for Kusama to open channels with Statemine. And it ends up being a little bit of message ping pong. And I think we'll probably clean that up so that you can just do it in a single go without sending the messages back and forth. Although I did construct the first calls to do that, and it was kind of fun working through it in my brain and sending the messages back and forth. But eventually figured it out, and yeah, so that's the process. And I guess like I'm not on the Kusama Council. So I don't have a ton of say in it, but like definitely as someone working on Statemint, I think we should be quite liberal with opening channels. So, I would definitely advocate for opening more HRMP channels so that more people can try it out.
Great. So we should aim for Kusama Council and get Kusama community referendum on opening the channel. Great. And on our side, we already training for that on our local environments, trying to open channel and transferring tokens cross-chain. So we have our local copy of Akawa with our local copy of Rococo testnet, sending back and forth value from Mangata to Akawa. So yes, we're getting ready for it.
Yeah, look forward to it once you've launched.
Yes, cool. That's actually also the same question that I wanted to ask, Gleb. And I didn't come up with a follow-up. I think we covered quite a lot. Question is, so maybe Joe, you've been telling us about what's just ahead. So what's the time horizon for you? Let's say cleaning up, consolidating, and so on. Is this 3 months or 6 months, or what's the time horizon? And maybe if you're also connected with the rest of the XCM development team, so what's the overall direction and what's the time horizon you're looking at? What can you talk about?
Yeah, so for like those kind of like midterm goals on Statemint, I'm kind of thinking like 3 to 4 months is my target for that. For XCM, I don't know the specifics so much. So I know version 3 is in progress, and I think there's actually just an open PR on the Polkadot repo if you want to check it out. And I think I'm not super knowledgeable about it. It's on my to-do list to go review all that and learn a bit about what's changing. But I think more expressive error response stuff to kind of like if there's an error in processing something to be able to send a response back to the sender and say something went wrong. So and I think some preparations for like peer-to-peer, like the full-on XCMP. So now we use HRMP, which just goes everything through the relay chain. But what we really want to do is have just chain-to-chain messaging without like HRMP or anything like that. So I think more primitives for that. And yeah, we've had like quite a few just like cross-chain interactions. So like there's something in Statemint, Statemine, where we say like, the relay chain council has some privileges. And so we were able, even though we didn't have like a council module in Statemint or Statemine, we could kind of say like, hey, there's this like executive body on can send you messages. So I think like more expressive origins and being able to express different collectives in cross-chain messages is something that will get a little bit easier to work with.
So you basically did the groundwork, and now you're seeing all of the necessary things you need to put in next, how to track errors, or what's follow-up messages and so on. And you also said this is one of the important parts in the ecosystem. If someone wants to create a better Explorer or improve on that it would be very helpful for you, right?
Yeah, definitely. Any kind of tools for dealing with XCM, or just like multi-chain applications. So like API middleware services, really useful. So if you kind of think about just even the basic stuff, like we have this identity module in Polkadot, like when you go to UI, it should tell you, it should be reading your identity from the chain. You have assets from a statement. If when there's a governance chain, it should be telling you that, this counselor, here's a list of counselors from the governance chain. Here's their identities from the identity chain. Here's the assets they own from statement, right? Like you need some kind of like API service that can all of these different parachains and present hopefully like a single API layer to front end and like UX developers that can just say like, here's Polkadot. So if you want to like display information about this account, it might have to read state from like multiple different chains. But it's a pain to make like a UX developer kind of make all the different API calls and WebSocket connections and everything. It'd be really useful to have some kind of like middleware that just says, here's, the identity of this account, and it just fetches something,
Maybe the folks from, for example, Talisman Wallet will look into this, because I've tested the web user interface, and it just grabs all of the existing tokens with the current value, and it shows you the value of your total portfolio. So maybe from their direction, and there are also, I see that there have been 2 new explorers since I joined the ecosystem.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of new explorers pop up last couple of years, and I checked out Talisman a couple of months ago, and it looked like they had a good idea going. I don't follow the weekly development of it, but yeah, I've heard good things.
Well, I guess then it's time to wrap it up here. I enjoyed today's talk very much. It's very nice to talk with someone who is so deep into the stuff and building a lot of it and really helping set the fundamentals for the ecosystem. So we really thankful that you have come here today and shared your insights and your knowledge with us, Joe.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's cool to talk to people who actually use it, because it is very very new, and we know there's bugs and stuff to work out. So yeah, we appreciate that people are really building on it.
Yeah, we hope to be there as a parachain in about 1 month, maybe 5-6 weeks. That would be the ideal path. And then you will hear from us latest.
Well, just want to give more thanks to Joe for joining us, for giving all that information, and looking forward to be connected to Statemint, and also looking forward to experiment with those cross-chain messages when actions are taken on one chain, but the actual value transfers are happening on Statemint or Statemint, because I believe it can create even more effective cross-chain networks, cross-chain systems. And also thanks to everyone who joined us again today for that awesome talk. Thank you all.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Yes, maybe as closing words, we hope, of course, to see you next week for Mangata Monday. It's every week, Monday, 6 p.m. UTC. Next week, we can't announce yet what we are going to talk about. It might be off the record session or an announcement. We are still deciding on that. But of course, we hope to see you. Besides that, we published a new blog post that you can now see in the chat. It's the Mangata playbook. It tells you everything about Mangata that you need to know and understand it. And with that, we wish you a good week and hope to see you next week. Bye-bye.